Okay, thank you, everybody. It's just gone 2 o'clock, so we'll resume and continue. So, just a quick point from me. As per the programme, so the, the rest of the legal compliance matters, with the exception of sustainability appraisal, which is tomorrow morning, we'll go through. So, I know there's some people in the room who are here for the housing requirement aspect of this. So we'll go through the remaining issues. We've got to issue 4 climate change. So we'll go through those remaining legal compliance matters. Then we'll have a 10 or 15-minute break so Louise can just sort of rejig the room around. And then we'll move on to that second issue for today around the housing requirement. Any matters rising from the council before we carry on? No? Okay, issue 4, climate change. Again, there's sort of 2 aspects to this really. There's legal requirements and there's also sort of matters of soundness around particular policies and what they say and whether they're effective. And that's really a sort of detailed development management policy issue, which we'll be coming on to discuss later on. But just show a row of hands. I know there were some people that wanted to speak to legal compliance in the context of legal compliance and climate change. Just show of hands of who wants to speak to that issue. Yeah, Mr. Bell.
Yes, so this was from the Inco Burko submission, was that we all agree that there are legally binding UK targets for emissions reductions. And it's clear from the sustainability appraisal that the plan has a negative impact, moderate negative impact on climate mitigation. So the question is, how could without having a detailed plan for breaking down, which also is the appraisal, there is no plan for mitigating emissions in this area. How can we ensure that we're not precluding the national targets, which are also under legal challenge and have lost court cases nationally? The government have got until now, the 29th of October, to come up with a plan for the nation. That's the starting point.
Really our point here is the importance of Greenbelt for climate change and as a means of ameliorating against it. And we don't think the plan's gone into looking at that aspect, and perhaps it should. So green space deals with water runoff, building creates more water runoff, for example. Trees absorb pollution. Greenbelt land with trees on is playing a sort of a live part in that whole process of climate change. And we just think that there should have been a little bit more in the plan about how the growth that Dacorum is proposing is going to impact negatively on climate change, and what needs to be done to make sure that it doesn't impact negatively.
Just remind me, are you here tomorrow for sustainability?
I am.
Okay, I was just personally wondering if that's more of an issue in terms of how that has been considered in the sustainability appraisal process, but potentially relevant here as well. I think that's explained earlier. There's a bit of a crossover with a lot of these topics. I think question 2 goes to the heart of it really. Does the plan taken as a whole include policies designed to secure that the development and use of land in the area contributes towards mitigation of and adaptation to climate change? So I sort of put that question to the council because then it might actually answer some of the points that people have raised. But that's the sort of crux of it for today, really.
Okay, thank you, sir. So just on this point, committee set out in our evidence and statements to this in particular. I just ask you that particular regard to that. But in summary, I think we do feel it is doing as much as it can to contribute towards, mitigation and adaptation of climate change. The starting point, I would say very simply, is it's a hard line to draw, I think, a little bit sometimes, because we have to go back to what the PPG says on this in particular. The PPG has a particular section, how can the challenges of climate change be addressed through the local plan? And the examples of mitigating climate change by reducing emissions, it advises reducing the need to travel, transit, see if that's not better.
Is there a problem with my, can you hear it on mine?
Okay, so that sounds a little bit better. Okay, we'll try that one. Brilliant. I thought we'd get through a day without it. Okay, so just going back to my point again from the PPG and kind of what the expectation of what local plans can do, particularly can do, reducing the need to travel and provide for sustainable transport, providing opportunities for renewable and low carbon energy, opportunities for decentralized energy and heating, low carbon design approaches to reduce energy. We feel we have a plan and policies that do that. And again, in looking at the examples of adapting to climate change, considering future climate risks when allocating development. Again, I think in flood risk, we've taken that fully into account with climate change. Considering the impacts of and promoting design responses to flood risk and coastal change. Again, that's reiterating that point. The impact of water and water infrastructure, obviously it made reference to an infrastructure delivery plan. And we've also had some very positive comments from the Environment Agency with regards to our plan. And again, promoting adaptation approaches in design policies and development. So in looking at the guidance, what the guidance expects plans to deliver, I think, our local plan is taken one of those boxes, but mainly with reference to the strategic policy CC1 to CC4. They provide a framework of mitigation and adaptation measures, but obviously there's wider measures. Is where the growth is located. It's what the transport solutions are, how we get people more sustainably out of their cars and on foot, and other ways. They all contribute towards the overarching goal. They do some policies do include standards where appropriate, but we note the written ministerial statement is quite an important factor. That of the 13th of December 2023, and our plan is reflective of that. We are not setting criteria over and above those of the building regulations, and that the expectation is that such detailed efficiencies is not really something that plans are expected to deliver. And finally, just to note that the policies place requirements on major developments to demonstrate how they will comply, providing a control measure and flexibility for site characteristics and changing technologies. So I hope that's helpful. Obviously, we'd love to be able to do more, but I think in the context of what is the remit to which a local plan can deliver, I think we have pushed the boundaries on that. I hope that's helpful.
And just CPRE's point, if you will, just about this sort of, again, it's probably a wider strategic point, just about sort of the green belt, the use of land, how you took those issues into account in, talking high level now, let's not get drawn into site selection, but, in terms of deciding on growth and growth strategies, how did you sort of take those sort of use of sort of greenfield sites and impacts on biodiversity? It might stray into sustainability appraisal, but for the purpose of the tests and legal compliance around climate change, just explain to us a little bit about how you sort of took those issues into account.
Same again. Apologies. Yeah. Okay. So I think with regards to greenbelt again, there's a possible change matters maybe of tomorrow, but we've sought to focus growth towards the most sustainable locations of the borough, and then having regard to that, I think the council is doing, doing a significant amount in going for development on brownfield land or seaflood land before looking towards greenfield land on the edge of our settlements in the greenbelt. But obviously, our strategy is seeking to allocate road on the edge of our market towns, and Hempstead as well, being the main one and focus for growth. By allocating these areas, we're ultimately seeking to reduce the need to travel by extension of that. We're seeking to, result in kind of commensurate positive effects with regards to, contributing towards the Climate Change Act.
Thank you. Yeah, just to following up on what you said. So agree there are positive qualitative statements in the proposals, but without, given that the sustainability appraisal says that there are moderate negative effects of the proposals, without a quantitative delivery plan, how can you be sure that those qualitative statements are sufficient? And I also note that there's no indicators for CC1 in the indicators list.
I was about to ask you on that actually. In your view, is this a resolvable matter subject to more robust monitoring in terms of if you put yourself in our shoes, what modification would you like to see to the plan, and then maybe we could put that to the council?
Yeah, thank you. So I think it would be.
So I wonder whether I might interrupt. I'm awfully sorry, but I've been told that the public are not hearing any discussion. So I think we need to pause there.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Looking to somebody with the technology, how long do you think how long do you think we need to sort this out?
Anyone got their Wi-Fi hotspot turned on right now? Wi-Fi hotspot, their own Wi-Fi that they've brought in, because that can be causing a lot of interference. Oh. We have DBC conference Wi-Fi. There should be passwords around the room. I don't know if someone over can get one of those to you. But
the guest Wi-Fi as well works?
Yeah, DBC guest works just fine, but there's conference room Wi-Fi too, but it's the Wi-Fi hotspots, they need to be turned off.
Do we need a quick 5 minutes just to check and reboot? Yeah, okay, we'll adjourn in a quick 5 minutes. People can turn off any Wi-Fi hotspots they've got on. We'll have a quick 5 minutes and just get the people with the tech just to check we can get back online. Thank you.
Hello, testing. How's that?
That helps.
Yeah. Testing.
How's that, Sylvia? Can you hear me clear? Is there any issue? Okay, how's that? Testing, 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 testing.
Are we distorted? Am I distorted through this? Yeah. No? Can you all hear me clearly through this one? Well, maybe there's a solution.
Just going to check and see if this is working also. Sounds better. Okay.
Have we lost anybody in that adjournment? I don't think so. Okay, well, no Wi-Fi hotspots. I'll add that to the guidance notes. If everybody's happy to carry on, I think Mr. Bell, we were with yourself? Yeah, okay, we'll resume then.
I now know how to throw a spanner in the works if we want, if something's not going the way I want. So you asked if I was in your shoes, what would potentially you do? So I guess I'd like to see some sort of statement that a quantitative plan will be developed and that the provisions in the plan may be adjusted if that quantitative plan shows that the provisions are not sufficient to meet the legal targets.
Thank you. I made this point in our written statement, so I don't want to prolong it, but as it was brought up about the methodology to help with this climate change was the selection of sites. Well, the selection of sites on ridge tops at the top of steep hills do not promote non-travel. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think if there was going to be a modification in general terms on this, we'd be looking for a statement that accepts the role of the Greenbelt as an ameliorator of climate change and shows how the council has taken Greenbelt into account in that mitigation equation more clearly. I think that's what we would like.
Okay, any final comments from the council? I know that a lot of the sort of more detailed nuance around what the policies say will come on to discuss. There'll be a dedicated section on and session on some of these policies, but anything you want to come back on from anything you've heard just there?
Not particularly, sir. I think, just to recognise that we feel our evidence is sufficiently robust and that the plan as a whole does overall contribute towards the overarching aims and objectives with regards to climate change. Thank you.
I think around some of the CC policies, as I said, there's probably some effectiveness issues that we'll come on to discuss when we look at sort of DM policies more in more detail. But no, for the purposes of this session, I think Mr. Bristol and I are happy to continue. Issue 5, public sector equality duty. Again, we've got the written statements on this, and we've asked questions, and things like Students and travel accommodation assessments, we'll have a session on. Did anybody raise any issues on the PSED, public sector quality duty, that are relevant now? No. Nothing the council wants to add on that? No. Issue 6 then, habitats regulations assessments. I have seen some representations on this. Again, Mr. Briston and I have asked the questions and we've seen the written submissions on this. So in terms of the habitat regulation assessment, we don't have any further questions, but I will open it up to those who have made reps on issue 6, habitat regs, and if they've got any points they wish to raise now. No? No comments on habitat regulation assessments? No? Anything from the council? No. As I said, and I'm not saying it's not relevant, it's just that we have set out various MIQs and got various written submissions on this from the council. I think in terms of where SANGs and SAMs are concerned, again, we'll come on to discuss these as site-specific days around allocations, and it probably goes to the heart of, are those allocations effective in terms of delivering the necessary mitigation, rather than any sort of fundamental objections from Natural England, etc. at this stage. Mr. Bristow?
No. No. Thank you. I think you're sorry. You're right. There are certain things that I would very much talk about. We'll talk about that go to auto tunes back on. That go to effectiveness of certain policies, including policies on gypsies and travellers, as you mentioned. In these respects, in terms of sounds and sound, but I'm going to, I think that will come at a later stage, and I don't want to delay things now. So that was why I was differing. Thank you.
Yeah, as I said, I think a lot of that goes to effectiveness and particular policies. It then links into infrastructure provision. It links into, probably importantly, things as well like deliverability rates, which we'll come on to discuss. So all these factors sort of entwined in a lot of the issues we discussed throughout the examination process. Issue 7, which is a sort of a mop-up really, where the plan contains a policy that's intended to supersede another policy in the adopted development plan, does it state that fact and identify the policy to be superseded? I'll make this quite quick, really. You said that it supersedes and then lists various plans. It's a very minor point, but I think just for clarity and effectiveness, I would just list the policies. It can be a relatively fairly straightforward appendix or wherever you want to put it, just be abundantly clear. These are the policies that are superseded by the new borough local plan. Yeah.
Absolutely fine with that. We'll take that away.
Yeah. Anything else on those matters that we've discussed under legal compliance? I know that ordinarily we've discussed sustainability appraisal in today's session as well, but due to availability, I'm having to sort of pick that back up tomorrow, but it does sit quite neatly in tomorrow anyway, because we're talking about things like spatial strategy, settlements, their size, how much they're going to grow by, so it does fit quite neatly in that session anyway. But any other points that people want to make then on anything they've heard so far or legal compliance? No? Okay, we'll take an adjournment because I know Louise wants to sort of rejig the room. So we'll come back after a break. Did you say how long do you need, Louise? Until 2:45? Okay, we'll come back at 2:45. It gives you a good sort of 15, 20 minutes. We'll rejig the room, we'll come back, and that's when we're going to be looking at the housing requirement issue. So some more soundness matters. So we'll take an adjournment and we'll resume back at 2:45, please. Thank you.
Sorry to disturb everyone, but just in light of the IT issues that we had a little while ago, the IT team have asked if everyone could just do a test into their microphone and make sure that everything seems to be working okay. So if that's okay, can I just get everyone just to possibly just introduce themselves? May need to happen again, but this is just a test run, just to make sure people at home can hear us.
So Keelan Mitchell, Principal Planning Officer, and mine is still bad. I can hear it coming through here. Mm.
James Stevens, Home Builders Federation. David Bainbridge, Savills.
David Murray Cox, Turley.
Brett Flashman, Fakem Homes.
Hughes Eagle, Bragg. Anthony Harvage, Bragg.
Jacqueline Peters, CPRE Hertfordshire. Okay.
Sorry, we're just testing the audio, as you imagine. I'm trying to check and see. There's just been a test run. We just asked everyone to speak into it, just to see if we're continuing to experience the issues. Seems to be a little bit there still. And I hope the people are probably trying the last attempts. Every time I'm doing this, I'm testing. I think it's probably worth giving it a go and seeing how far we get.
Okay, thank you all. We'll resume and continue. Mine sounds okay. So this next part of today's session, we're going to be looking, sort of jumping ahead slightly, looking at the housing requirements in particular. So there's five questions around this. I am mindful that there's some new faces around the table. So I could just quickly ask the council just to briefly run through any fire and emergency procedures that any new participants need to be aware of whilst they're in this chamber.
Thank you. So we did have a test fire alarm this morning. We're not expecting another fire alarm test. On hearing the fire alarm, everyone must leave immediately the building by the nearest available routes. We do have two doors here. The emergency exit stairwells are right in front of the council chamber itself and just to the left of the lifts. Please follow the fire marshal. In the event of fire, and if you need assistance, please speak to reception now. The main assembly point in the event of a fire alarm is the market square. So please follow fire marshals in. Toilets are located to the left of the lifts and downstairs, also to the left of the cafe. The hearing sessions are being live streamed and recorded to be made available after the session. Please be aware and leave the council chamber if you do not wish to be filmed. There's instructions about microphones. We basically use the right button to turn on and off, and we hope that the signals will hold up for this afternoon. And again, just to reiterate, we have had some technical issues. For anyone who's new to this, we advise people to connect to the Wi-Fi, the council's Wi-Fi. There should be details around the tables, but if not, speak to Louise, I think, on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Rather than going around the table and asking everybody to introduce themselves, just for those new people on the same sort of looking at this section of the room, as and when you come to speak on any of the issues, just let me know, first of all, who you are, introduce yourself to the hearing, let me know who you are, if you're acting on behalf of a particular client or residence group, etc. That would be much appreciated. Right, okay, we'll crack on. Housing needs and the housing requirement. I think there's been discussion around this already this morning. There's been some written exchanges between ourselves and the council. It might be helpful if the council could just start by just sort of introducing this topic and explaining what the housing requirement and the plan period is in the submitted plan, and whether or not you think that's correct, and if not, what you think it should be.
Thank you, sir. So, just I'll probably just be extremely complete on this in terms of what you refer to as the submitted plan. So, when we produced the Regulation 19 pre-submission version of the plan, it included a start year of 2024 and then year 2020 or 2031 for the period 2026. Try. Yeah. No problem. I hope that's the issue. So the pre-submission version of the period 2026 to 2041, it had a supply of 15,332 homes, set against an annual requirement of 1,016 homes, which would have been a local housing requirement of a minimum of 15,240 homes. When we submitted the plan, we included in our response to key issues, Appendix B of the Regulation 22, which is CD 10.2. We reflected on the fact that a number of people have raised this as a key issue. We reviewed it and sought to update our figures accordingly. With that, we were changing the start year of the plan from 2026 to 2024. We were not seeking to change the end period of the plan, which is 2041. It is now a 17-year period. Most recently, I think for the ease of the discussion, I would just talk about supply relative to that. Okay. So with the requirement as a result of that change is 17,272 homes minimum. And with that, in response to that, we identified a supply of 16,400 homes to meet that requirement.
So in terms of your plan then, where does the housing requirement feature? What policy, where does this feature in the actual submitted plan?
So within the submitted plan, the requirement is represented as an annual requirement of 1,016 dwellings per annum. That's set out in strategic policy H1, delivering the housing strategy. Subpoint 2 states the new homes will be delivered against a requirement of 1,016 dwellings per annum.
And then the issue is that at point 1, it refers to the plan period as 2026, and you're now suggesting it should be 2024.
Yeah.
So just in terms of maths then, so it's council's position to be abundantly clear that the submitted plan is unsound and that we need to recommend the main modification to policy H1. It would change the start date in there to 2024. LHN, housing requirement figure applied across the plan period, would give a total of 17,272. Not right.
That's correct.
Just sticking with the requirement then and the basic figures, we'll go around the table and just seek any views as to whether people agree, disagree with that, and if you disagree with it, what modifications you think need to be made to the plan to make it sound. We'll start with Mr. Bainbridge.
Thank you, sir. In our hearing statement, which I won't repeat, hopefully it sounds okay, I'm feeling slightly metallic. We'd asked for consideration of 1 additional year at least to the year 2042. And I think because the way we planners like to monitor, record and assess that year is both 1st of April to the 31st of March in the following year. I think it partly depends as to when the council estimates or forecasts that they might be in a position to adopt the local plan. I think now that we're seeing what the council's position is in terms of the end date, if the council, and this is perhaps a question for you, if the council considers that it could adopt the local plan before the 31st of March 2026, I think I'm right in saying they would have a minimum 15-year period. So as clarification beyond our hearing statement, we'd have to say that that could be considered sound, although we have requested that additional 1 year. If it is post that, it would be a consideration as to whether it would be the minimum 15 years for the purpose of the strategic policy H1. I want to say, I've spoken quite a lot there about the end period. Did you want a point regarding the start period in LHN, or would you prefer to go around the table just on the end period for the plan?
What's your views on the start date then? So obviously the LHN figure, I don't think is in dispute, the annual figure, unless anyone's going to correct me.
I think our position in respect of the start date, where it has been pulled forward, is our reading the planning practice guidance in respect to the standard method for the local housing need, which of course you'll be aware allows plan making authorities to take the year of assessment under the standard method as the first year or the base year going forward. I think I'm right in saying that the council is now seeking through main modifications to bring forward that period to correspond with their assessment of the local housing need. And I think I'm also right in saying that the planning practice guidance allows for plan making authorities to use that local housing need figure for a period of 2 years beyond submission of their local plan. So slightly unusually for me, I think I'm in agreement with what the council is now proposing and wouldn't seek a change to that.
I'm sorry, but we're going to have to take another adjournment and try and resolve this. If we all speak very loudly, can they hear us? Literally through the microphones. Right. Okay. Could we have another 5-10 minute adjournment? I'll ask the council if they can sort of go away and do as best they can. Can I just ask everybody, since it is interference, I think, is just everyone just turn off all their mobile phones or anything else which may have a signal which may be interfering with the tech. If we all do that and then give the council time to have another look at this, we'll come back in 5 or 10 minutes and we'll see if it's hopefully resolved itself. It did seem to be working to start with, and then and it went off again. So again, if I could just ask council to just have a look at that, but please, if everybody else around the table, just turn everything off, mobile phones off, etc., that may have a potential to interfere with it. I think that could hopefully help matters as well. We'll do the same ourselves. Thank you.
I've turned down the gain a bit. How's that sounding? Okay. I'm going to pick on someone. No, not. Who? Does someone else give their microphone a try?
Let's see, is this any better? Okay. Who else had the, Mr. Barrett isn't here. This is the, okay, I'll try that. How's this? Better? Okay. There's a lag. I mean, if it sounds better.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Is that does sound a little bit? This is just a test to see if the sound is any better. Hopefully it is. If mobile phones are now turned off, doesn't sound quite as metallic. Fingers crossed.
Have we got everybody? I think so. Okay, we'll resume and continue. And Louise, if you can let me know if people are struggling. But I think we'll crack on and see if we can do as best we can. Mr. Bainbridge, I asked the question as to whether or not you consider the plan was unsound, and you were starting to say that you did agree with the council's suggested change around the start of the plan period. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So you are correct. So I think that in effect there's a consideration of the end period and the start period. The end period is proposed to be unchanged by the council. The start period is proposed to be changed by the council. We requested it in the end period for an additional 1 year to get to the minimum 15 years. But my understanding now is that the council estimates or forecasts, I probably should say, adoption of the local plan by the end of March 2026. So my calculations, I think, is that the plan to 2041, if it's a plan to the 31st of March 2042, so that 2041-2042 year, that would be a minimum of 15 years. So I don't think I could continue with the case to say it would be unsound on the basis of the end date, but that is just my understanding if the council is proposing to the 31st of March 2042, which covers the 2041-42 year. So that was the point regarding the end date. I don't know if, sirs, you would like me to pause there and then come back to the start for the plan period?
So just in terms of the submitted plan, it goes to 2041. It doesn't start, as far as I'm aware, specifying sufficient detail, March, April, etc. The crux of it is it's to 2041. That's what it says on the front cover. What's the soundness issue with that? If you just take that as a matter, the plan goes to 2041, and take your point about adoption dates of the plan. Depending on when it's adopted, we don't know when it's going to be adopted. Depending on when it's adopted, it could have a plan period of 14 years. What's the soundness issue with that?
So just the test under the framework, the National Planning Policy Framework, I think it might be paragraph 22, I could check, but no doubt says you have that in mind, which seeks for strategic policies to be a minimum 15 years from the date of adoption of the local plan. Of course, policy H1 and other policies are strategic policies which would qualify under that paragraph.
But we all know there's plenty of local plans out there that don't. The NPPF talks about plans should have 15 years. So as inspectors, is there anything that you can put before us that says, no, hang on, you must direct the council to change this? You must direct the council to add further years onto their plan, given what the NPPF says, given that they're going to be under statutory review after 5 years anyway, and potentially early review, which we must talk about. Is there anything that you can point to as well we can use to say this council must change the end date of its plan?
So no, there is not, no.
Yeah, thank you. David Murray-Cox at Turley on behalf of Dacorum. So very similar points to Mr. Bainbridge, actually. But I came into this just covering one point that was discussed then. I came into this examination on the understanding the expectation was the plan would run to the 31st of March 2041. We also
supported the extension of the plan period by a further year for exactly the same reasons. Won't go back over those. We support the start date being 2024. But the query I have arises from 1.1.1 of the Council's matter statement for this session, which does refer to the plan period being 2024-5 to 2041-42. So my question is, well, what is it? Is it 41 or 42? Because obviously that has a bearing on question 2. And if it is 42, then the requirement is 18,288.
We read the council's evidence and the details. My understanding, and I'll sort of look to the council's team to correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the council's position is that the plan period should be 2024 to 2041. 17 years.
Yes, sir, 17 years. It is that calendar or financial year element 2024-25. But looking forward, that is year 1, and year 17 is 2040/41. So it ends on March 2041.
The council's position then is it should be 17 years, and I think the points that are being made is, okay, let's work on that assumption, but it doesn't give you the full 15 years post-adoption as directed by the framework. That's your point. Yeah. Any other comments on that? Any other comments from the council? I sort of cut across that question because I could almost sort of guess what you're going to say, really, but that's the point. This is the crux. We obviously go around and have a lot of these hearing sessions, and this issue crops up everywhere. But is there anything further you wanted to add on the 14 years versus 15 years point?
I think nothing at this stage, sir. Just mindful that as I submitted this in accordance with that local development scheme that option at spring 2026. Now seeing the context of that, we were looking to plan 15 years forward from that time.
So I think in terms of main modifications, this morning you suggested that you didn't think the plan was unsound. Presumably you think it is unsound because you're saying we need to modify policy H1. So by definition it must unsound.
Thank you. It was probably taken in the context of, the framework as a whole. I think it was more in relation to the matter of supply rather than anything else.
So the council's position is we've submitted the plan. However, we accept in hindsight, having looked at this, we accept there needs to be a change to the plan period. Most notably, that's found in policy H1, and just applying your 1,016 dwellings per annum across the 17-year plan period, which is your 17272 figure. So policy H1 there, I think there's pretty sort of common ground around the table then that needs to be modified for effectiveness to make it clear what the housing requirement, notwithstanding what people said about plan periods, policy H1 needs to be modified to make it clear what the housing requirement is. So apply across the plan periods 17272. Is that right? Yeah. Right. That's great. Okay. Any observations on that? Yeah, Mr. Bainbridge.
Thank you, sir. I wonder perhaps if the source that we turn to is document CD 10.8. Sirs, you may or may not need to refer to it. I'm sure you've already had a look at it. But my understanding is that that document, which is a council document, it modifications, including on page 6 PDF, which is the proposed change to policy H1. I'm just, in effect, looking for clarification as to whether that's the council saying these are proposed main modifications to says we'll consider we should make plans sound.
Just some of main modifications. The council has submitted its plan. So the council can suggest changes, but the starting point is the submitted plan. So they can be council's suggested changes, but we can only recommend main modifications. So we've noted the council's comments about various things, but as far as we're concerned, we are just working off the submitted plan. I won't sit here and direct the council as to what exactly policy they should say. It's their plan. I'll leave that in their hands as to how they come up with the actual changes. And as I described this morning, they'll be subject to full public consultation. The crux of it is you need a strategic housing policy that sets out what the minimum housing requirement is over the plan period. I think H1 is sensibly where it goes. So I'll just leave that with the council to look at how they tweak and modify that to actually reflect that. Yeah, there are circumstances where practice guidance suggests that there could be an alternative higher figure to the local housing need assessment figure. Now, the council in their hearing statement have set out that none of those circumstances apply to this borough, and they've given their reasons for that. I'll open it at this stage. Has anybody made any representations to suggest that that figure should be higher and that any of those circumstances apply here? Yeah, Mr. Murray Cox.
Thank you, sir. The point that we've set out in our Matter 2 statement is that your attention is drawn to document HOU.01, the local housing need assessment update from March last year, which does look to those three categories that the council referred to as well in their matter statement. What it seems to have done, though, in that text is to see those as a narrow set of circumstances. In our view, it's evident from the MPPF, P&G, as well as paragraph 6.5 of the March 24 document that those circumstances are exhausted. There are two circumstances that our statement refers to. That needs assessment itself identifies the overall affordable housing need in this authority alone as being 737 dwellings per annum. That's 72.5% of the minimum LHM. And obviously, this plan won't get anywhere near to addressing that. And in many years, obviously, supply will be lower than the 1016 as well. And since the regulation 19 stage, of course, we've got the updated LHM, which is 1390. I'll stress that point because obviously we're not examining the plan against that, but it does suggest the overall requirement is higher. In our submission, what the authority and the authors of the March 24 document should have done is look beyond those three circumstances to the broader housing situation in this authority, the extremely high affordable housing needs, and explored as a consequence of that whether or not an increased requirement was justified.
As we set out in the Reg 22 statement, it was identified as a key issue. And as said, I refer back to our responses to these particular points and the evidence to date. I think, we've obviously been very, very careful in our decisions on this in many regards, and we have had, in coming to a view, we've taken them into account. We still consider the plan can be submitted as is in the context of particularly the 2023 MPPF and also the transitional arrangements of the 2024 MPPF. And as expanded on by the government's consultation to the changes to the MPPF at the time, we said, we can't proceed, we can't be examined against this requirement. And again, I would say that's sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murray Cox focused on affordable housing and affordability as one of the reasons and rationale behind it. And I believe the question was whether or not there were representations that went to this matter. 10.8 confirms that there were multiple representations to this matter from multiple parties, ourselves included. And it's not, in reality, it's not just affordable housing that's the issue here. Significantly beyond that, it's the provision of specialist housing, but perhaps more significantly, and obviously this is a matter that we'll come on to in due course, it's the provision of additional housing within and beyond the local housing need number will protect against the need for an immediate review of the green belt that we see as being almost a prerequisite in the context of the current plan. But just in that context, again, just in terms of sort of where myself and my colleagues sit, is there anything within national planning policy or any other soundness reason that would make us direct the council to go away and effectively look at that as part of this and say, hang on a minute, we base this on LHA, look at our figure. What mechanism have I got to direct the council to look at a higher figure? I've had to turn my iPad off or add the MPPF with all the references, so apologies if I haven't got the references 100% correct. But I believe it's para 145 that talks about greenbelt boundaries, permanence in the long term, not needing to look beyond, looking beyond the plan period. So it's in that kind of rough ballpark of greenbelt MPPF. Sorry, sir, I did make a handwritten note, para 148E.
So just if I can on the matter of affordability, I think if we can probably just deal with that in this moment. So first and foremost, I think affordable housing is considered as part of the standard method, first and foremost. There's a reason that, you know, there's adjustments to take account of affordability. And that obviously calculation has changed through the more recent standard method, revised standard method published in December, but that's not what this plan is being tested against. But it does make an allowance for affordability, and it's for that reason that, you know, we do have quite a high annual requirement. I think with regards to what the plan is doing, the plan is doing quite a bit with regards to affordability. I'll go through some examples right now. Strategic Policy H3 requires affordable housing and major developments. This is the affordable housing policy. And schemes of between 6 and 9 homes in the children's national landscape. 25% of flat developments in Hemel Hempstead required to deliver affordable housing, and 40% elsewhere. Looking at this, you know, it's probably just clear to say that affordability is an issue all across the southeast and anywhere within the influence of London. And looking at our evidence, to which I know some people have referred to, the Housing Needs Assessment HOU 01.1, table 1.2 shows the needs of affordability is considered in isolation would be 737 dwellings per annum. Now, if we were to look at that figure and try and plan for that figure, we were saying that 75 to 8% of our annual requirement should be affordable housing, taken in the context of the standard method. We know our viability evidence cannot do that. It's not viable. So we can't recommend that. If we were to look to say that says, well, if we apply the affordable housing percentages that we have in the plan, which we know are viable, and map that out and say we need market housing 60%, for instance, that would mean that this plan would need to have a minimum requirement of 2,450 homes, just by example, if we were to basically say that, you know,
40% of Greenfield sites will deliver affordable housing. That's unrealistic as well. So obviously in line with the direction of travel and being mindful of the next steps this plan is going to have to face up to in the coming years, I feel that what we're putting forward right now is realistic and deliverable. Takes account of affordable housing and the standard method, which it too takes account of affordability. And it's probably just worth in conclusion on this, that the council has got a strong record of affordable housing delivery. It's exceptionally good. We're a very strong delivery body itself of that. Another thing that, having regard to the issues and the key issues raised through consultation, is the matter of genuinely affordable, not just affordable, but genuinely affordable. Many people say that affordable in its traditional sense is not affordable here. And we, Dacorum and Strategic Policy H2, been very clear that affordable homes for rent should be kept at 60% or around 60% of market values, not 80%. And that draws upon a significant amount of evidence that the council itself has produced. It's informing an upcoming affordable housing SPD also. But yeah, and we see that as very much responding to the matter of the people want genuinely affordable, and we have to consider that in the balance also. So they're the key points on affordability and why the council has considered its approach today.
Thank you. That was very clear. Can I come in on that point? It was something Mr. Churchill mentioned, which has sort of being a mouthpiece of other representations. It's come out in other representations. This issue of specialist or C2 use class C2 accommodation as opposed to C3. Two questions, if I can. Well, it's one and a half. Is there an explicit requirement in a plan policy in terms of specialist or C2 or older persons accommodation? I think I know the answer to that. And if not, is it the council's position that needs in those respects are taken into account in the overall housing requirement, or are they something different? Thank you.
Thank you, sirs. It's a valid point. Is there an explicit requirement within the plan? No, there isn't. Is it taken account of within the overarching requirements? Yes, it is. There's probably just a few points I'd like to add on this, just because I think it's important. So what we do have is up-to-date evidence, again, going back to the Southwest Herts Local Housing Needs Assessment, HOU 1.1. It's up to date. A significant amount of work has been done with regards to that. There's dedicated sections within the plan that consider this very point. The needs are being met through SP, Strategic Policy H2, mix of housing. There is something that the council had considered throughout the years, was whether we seek to take a very flexible approach to needs, recognising they form part of the overarching requirement to be met, or whether we need to be more specific on some matters. And it was the council's view that we will try and keep it flexible for a variety of reasons. Strategic Policy H1 supports all form of housing within the built-up areas. So whether it's C2, C3 or otherwise, the strategy itself is highly permissive with regards to the principle of housing, so long as it's not allocated for another use. Strategic Policies H2 and H3 provide a mix of housing, and as well are very clear that on greenfield sites, larger allocations are expected to deliver a wider mix of housing, range of housing. Particularly H3.2, it's also very clear that some affordable housing, as you say, the specialist housing, C2, or where it is C3, is expected to also deliver affordable housing as well. The plan as a whole, again, taken into account, it is C2, it is specialist, it is other forms. And importantly too, we have other policies. Strategic Policy H6 is about accessible and adaptable homes as well, and the importance of having accessible and adaptable homes, so that for those within market or less,
So within chapter 12, just including on this, very much kind of expectation on all our sides. To provide for a specific land use requirement, but we have not overly prescribed that. The reason for that is there's a number of people out there say they want a particular form, a particular type. But I think we all recognize here that the needs of older people is not just one type or two types, it's a range of types. And my nervousness with the plan is if we try to be too prescriptive on one type without being clear on the other types, it equally results in a very ineffective policy. Nevertheless, we are listening, we are open to discussions on it. This is the council's approach, but if you feel there's any changes considered necessary, we'll happily take that on board.
I think I take the point that Mr. Churchill made. I think we will take that away as whether or not, because the plan does talk about this. I was just looking at the plan does talk about, so page 44 talks about our evidence has also identified the need for different forms of accommodation as the care and support needs of older people and their ability to live independently changes over their lifetime. It's whether or not the plan, and it's maybe through those paragraphs, and again, we'll take it away. It's whether it needs to actually set out in a bit more detail what those needs are there. So I do take the point that Mr. Churchill's making. I don't think it's a housing requirement LHN policy H1 issue. I think it's probably more a sort of fleshing out of the supporting text into policy H2 issue. Because what your plan's saying is you've done some work, it's identified these needs, but it doesn't really sort of go further, does it? It doesn't say anything about what they are. But equally, I take your point that where do you stop with that? Do you refer to absolutely everything? Because the minute this plan's adopted, a couple of years down the line, those figures are then out of date. So then you've got people saying, well, hang on a minute, it says 300 here, but that's out of date. So I don't know the answer. We'll take that away. There will be a session in stage 3 on housing needs, specific housing needs, and how the plan is then effective in meeting these needs. And it may be that we all have to sort of go away and come back at that session and think, how far do we go with this? But I take the point Mr. Churchill made. Could it go further? Yes. Is there a danger that it goes too far? Then it just ends up with numbers that are out of date. Equally, yes. So it's probably somewhere in the middle. Not very helpful, I know, but worth mentioning now because it's something we will return to in the context of, I think, policy H2 rather than an LHN policy H1 matter. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes. Obviously, I was making a point more in the context of exceeding that local housing need. That the reason for raising it now.
But I think in terms of where the plan sits, it's you've got LHN. We all sort of we can go to what the framework and the PPG says. Apply it across your plan period. So get your plan period correct, and we've talked about 2024, 2041. Apply an LHN across that. That's where you're going with your housing requirement, which does lead nicely on to the next question around whether or not that requirement is a single flat annualized requirement across the plan period, or whether or not it's a stepped requirement. Now, the reason that we asked this question around whether or not it was a sort of flat, this is what we're going to do every year, or whether it was a stepped requirement, is in the context of some of the sites that we'll come on to talk about, Hellgarden communities, the obvious ones, and what the PPG says around large strategic sites, typically taking longer to come forward, etc., etc. So our question to the council was whether you think that housing requirement should be a flat requirement across the plan period or a stepped requirement. You responded and you said you think it should be just a flat requirement across the plan period. Do you just want to explain to us and other people around the table sort of what your rationale for that is and why you think that's a sound approach?
Thank you, sirs. So This is very much, I guess, going into the number crunching exercises of supply, and one of the positive, very positive elements of our plan and why we have submitted it is we feel we want to deliver that step change in growth. And equally, our council don't want to shy away from that. We want to say, no, this plan we feel can meet that. We're mindful of plans around us where they are putting forward a step change. I think we have, in considering, this position, we've had regard to a wide range of matters in terms of commitments, completions as well, the windfall allowance, and also, in particular, the site allocations we've put forward within the submitted plan. We've worked with site promoters and agents and landowners with regards to statements on ground. We've got a firmed up view and the likelihood of when people are expected to submit applications and demonstrate deliverability. That's perhaps for a later date. But having regard to all of the evidence and the numbers I set out within our plan, we feel that we can apply on adoption when considering a flat rate in terms of that. So the benefits of this is that we are seeking to do that step change and why we want to have this plan adopted. So in light of that, we put forward that we don't feel at this stage step trajectory is necessary. We want to be able to kind of almost set ourselves that bar that we feel is sound. So I'll just leave it there. With any further questions.
Thank you. We consider that a flat position in respect to housing requirements across a plan period is appropriate, in line with policy, in line with the PPG, but we just query in terms of the trajectory which is set out within the submitted local plan for delivery on that basis. And appreciate, sir, that you made it clear that you are not here to examine the potential main modifications, but more so it's in respect of the trajectory which we've got within the submitted plan, which is under policy H1 on page 43 of the document, and in particular table 2. Thank you.
Sorry, just go back on that point then. So let's work on the assumption that main modifications come forward that change policy H1. It sets out total housing requirement, and that's just a flat requirement figure for the council. What are your concerns then with the rest of H2? Is it the council's housing trajectory in table 2?
Yes, it is, sir. And just for it would be needed to be updated to reflect the start period and also what their current updated position, which I believe is May of this year, is in respect of estimated delivery.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree. Table 2 will need updating for effectiveness. I think the answer to this as well is at this stage on day 1, we don't know, because obviously we're going to come on, and I'm not sure if you heard this morning, but I was talking about the joint session we've got on the strategic matters around Hemel Garden communities, and then we'll go into the site specific. So it's a direction to council. Yes, I agree. Table 2 will need to be modified and updated. What that will show, unfortunately, is a question we don't know the answer until we've actually debated all the sites. There may be some sites that fall away. We may conclude that some sites are unsound and should be deleted. So I think it's a valid point, but in terms of what the trajectory will say, we simply don't know at this stage. We will know once we've been through all the sites. We need to talk about strategic infrastructure, for example, is one of the obvious ones. Hemel Garden communities. When do things need to be built? So that will have an impact on your trajectory. We're coming down this end of the table, so I can't read your name on its side. If you could introduce yourself to the hearing and let me know again who you're acting on behalf of.
Thank you, sirs. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Cameron Ottenfeld from RPS, here today on behalf of Gleeson Mann. Principally, I would offer a measure of support for the council's current approach for a flat trajectory. I would observe that approach has been adopted on the assumption from the council that they can meet their development needs within the plan period, and there are no reasons to enact some of those to paragraph 12 of the PPG. No. That's fine. So just going into that paragraph, which remains unchanged in recent years, we're advised that there might be two reasons why the council might want to adopt a step trajectory. The first being that there's a big change in the housing requirement, principally one that's come forward during the course of plan making. That's not the case the council are facing here. We know the council has been planning towards a requirement or a similar requirement for a certain amount of time. The second reason might well be that the council have large strategic sites that need a long lead-in period on which to come online, and the step trajectory can be brought in that scenario. Again, the council appear to suggest that whilst they are relying on some large strategic sites, they will come forward later on in the plan. What I want to do here, so I appreciate we're probably going to revisit this topic when we come back to revisiting the trajectory after considering all the sites, but I think there's a necessary sort of measure to sort of think about now that sort of we reflect upon after that session. And the 2 points I think, Sarah, I want to take you to are, the comment that's been made by this afternoon in relation to affordable housing. We've already heard that the latest housing needs survey indicates a particularly high affordable housing target, some 700 units or 737 dwellings per annum. And the consequence, I think, of putting in place that trajectory actually has quite real implications for the ability to meet affordable housing needs early on. So delegating or defining housing needs to later plan has a lasting consequence of hitting the council's affordable housing waiting lists. The second observation I would probably moot, and I might be lambasted for this one, but is the reflection of what would happen when the council, or if it does adopt their plan, and let's say we move to an adoption in 2026 and the council moves towards a review. We know from the latest standard method that the council's housing need will increase. So if there's an increased housing need, and we invite the potential for a step trajectory, then there is, again, a bit of a concern that you are pulling up a measure of unmet need right to the back end of the plan, therefore sort of delegating the decision. So just as a summary, no issue with the council's approach by now. At the moment, I completely agree, but I think this is probably a matter to reflect upon once we've been through that site assessment. But I just wanted to put those 2 points out as important considerations when we do get around to that session.
Kirsten Ward from DLP Planning on behalf of Angle Land and Developments Limited. I'd like to echo some of the comments that have just been said, really, in terms of the council's approach to the trajectory. It seems that the council are happy to accept a sort of flat requirement, which is what we would support. But I just wanted to comment in terms of the stepped trajectory, if that were to be considered. I'd just like to highlight paragraph 68-021 of the PPG, which says that stepped requirements will need to ensure that planned housing requirements are met fully within the plan period. The plan at the moment includes provision for 16,400 dwellings, which is below the requirement figure of 17,272. So therefore, we don't believe that a step trajectory would be appropriate without identifying additional sites in order to meet that requirement in full. Thank you.
There's some general sort of consensus then about the council's approach to having this flat requirement, as we refer to. So it's a sort of annual requirement applied across the plan period. That does bring us neatly onto the issue around the consequence of changing policy H1. So we've talked about modifications to policy H1 and housing requirement figure being this 17272. The consequence of that is whether or not the plan identifies sufficient homes to meet that need figure. And it's a matter that we raised the initial questions with the council. And we said, okay, change your housing requirement to 17272 before we even get into any discussion about site deliverability, how long it's going to take them to go. Can you even meet your housing needs? And if not, what can you do about it? What is the council's position at the sort of very start process of this examination in terms of whether or not the plan can meet the minimum housing needs over the full plan period? Why do you think, yes, we can change policy H1 to refer to 17272, but why do you think the plan that sits behind that figure and the supply that sits behind that figure, that's still sound, justified and appropriate?
Thank you, sirs. It's a very important point. I'll do my best to be as clear as I can on this. So firstly, just to reiterate that, as you said, we recognise that the plan is currently only identified a supply for 16,400. We still consider that this position is consistent with the framework when read as a whole. And I will summarise by just cross-referencing back to our response to matter 2, issue 1 and question 5 on this. So the plan itself, as submitted, was always seeking to meet 1,016 dwellings per annum as a requirement. This aims to meet the requirement in full. The aim of the plan and the strategy is to significantly boost the supply of homes, which again is consistent with the framework, particularly paragraph 60. The local plan identifies land to meet this requirement, consistent with paragraph 69 of the framework, which deals specifically with the point of land, insofar as it's got a deliverable supply for the first 5 years. It's got, identifies and allocates land considered to be developable for years 6 to 10, and where possible, it's the where possible element of that's quite important, for years 11 to 15. Other parts of the framework are also relevant. We need to have up-to-date evidence. Paragraph 61, 63 of the framework are particularly important on that. We've already mentioned, set out with relation to the step trajectory question. We feel we can already demonstrate a 5-year supply and adoption without needing a step trajectory. Also, as we consider any shortfall that we've identified through our most recent submissions are likely to be addressed by the 1st of April 2026, consistent with the soundness tests set out in paragraph 35 of the framework. And I think just to probably conclude on one particular point about what we feel is consistent on this with regards to the framework. Again, paragraph 35A and the positively prepared point. And in that it says it's the local plan should provide a strategy which, as a minimum, seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed need. I think the point there on strategy rather than sites is an important consideration also. So I would just stop there. I would just say that that's why we feel this plan as submitted is consistent with the framework. We feel there's a very positive message right now, and I think any concerns around any shortfall is not likely to be something that's likely to be deferred to the end of the plan period, but ultimately likely to be addressed on adoption. Thank you.
So how would you respond? Obviously, there's various representatives around the table that said, well, it's not positively prepared because the plan and the strategy simply does not seek to meet your minimum local housing need. See, this is the point that's been made by representatives is yes, yes, you can identify deliverable sites within years 1 to 5. and sort of reel off what you just said about the framework for years 6 to 10, 11 to 15. But as a minimum, what LHN is saying is that is your minimum housing requirement. You apply it to your plan period. And what representatives are suggesting is that you're not doing that. You're not meeting, the strategy isn't positively prepared, and it's not effective because it's not meeting those minimum requirements. Emphasis on the minimum. So how do you respond to sort of those criticisms, and why, again, sort of putting yourself in our situation, why do you think we can conclude that the plan is sound when it fails to meet those minimum requirements?
So as set out, when we submitted this plan, we included alongside an acceptance and recognition that the start date needed to change. We also set out quite clearly, you know, and recognized there would be a shortfall. And we also set out at that time, we felt that there was, you know, reasons and avenues to how that can be addressed. So I've already mentioned one of them, which is that the shortfall can be remedied through updated completions and commitments. So we do have to reflect that the change relates to 2 years, which are, dare I say, a little bit in limbo as we go from a submitted or a finalised plan to an adopted plan. And we recognised in that, in light of when we submitted it, we're submitting in a context of, you know, an updated national planning policy framework that sets, you know, a clear strategy for how development will come forward, where there are plans that are out of date. You know, the inclusion and introduction of grey belt is having a, you know, a material effect on this borough. And that looking at that period to which those years relate, we said there is reasons for that there. That would reduce any such shortfall. And again, as set out in our most recent evidence, we do feel that shortfall is likely to be negligible, zero, or even surpassed on adoption. Now, we do recognise that there's plenty more to be discussed in coming weeks and stages with regards to sites and deliverability of sites, but, you know, our starting point always has to be that the plan is sound and that we feel that these sites are deliverable and that the trajectory is accurate. But I understand your points on that, you know, and recognise that, but, you know, it is a very challenging time to be able to crystal ball a little bit with regards to housing supply. But, you know, what we have seen most recently is a figure that was probably in excess of 1,000 that was reduced to about 800 plus. And again, further reduced in recent months to be closer to 350 homes as a shortfall. The matter is starting to deplete to a point where there's likely to not be a matter at all in April next year. And for that reason,
And again, is there an element of you know, trying to consider quite a big question on day one? We don't know what the element of that shortfall is. We've not got on to discuss any of your sort of big strategic sites. They could change, the situation could change, your supply situation could change. So is it just for our benefit, for going away from sort of day one, is that the council, yes, accepts the plan as submitted is unsound, the housing requirement figure needs to change because the plan period changes. The consequence of that is there's a shortfall. However, circumstances are changing and have continued to change from submission of the plan. The gap is narrowing, and you're confident on your trajectory, you're confident in your site deliverability, and you're confident that that gap will have narrowed to such a degree, may even be a surplus. Hence, we don't need to go into what representatives around the table will know that tell them that the council needs to go away and find more sites. And what's the council's position then on whether that is the case? Are you saying that, well, we simply don't know and we can't sort of speculate on day one as to what the consequence might be, i.e. early reviews, finding more sites, etc. So you're comfortable on day one that actually this gap will narrow to such a degree that the submitted plan will be sound?
in short, yes. And just probably reiterating the point for everyone in the room is, you know, what we do feel, and that position is our position set out and why it's consistent with the framework. we are very amenable and recognise the request that a way to potentially remedy this or to provide some confidence and flexibility is the potential to consider a modification plan for an early review. Again, we don't particularly feel it's necessary in light of everything else that exists around national policy transitional arrangements. You know, the view is that we do need to be meeting 1,016 homes and that this plan can be adopted on that. We do recognise that swiftly there's going to be another step for the council on adoption of this plan. And that is we do need to get on and we do need to respond to the updated standard method, the updated MPPF and C2, you know, to review this plan relatively swiftly. And that's the clear message we're giving today. What we want now is to have that starting point to get a plan in place that delivers that step change to get us to that 1,000 figure, to get us that 5-year supply, that then we can look and say, well, if there is a shortfall and it is at the end of our plan period, then to all intents and purposes, the next plan is going to have to accommodate an even higher requirement and an even bigger challenge.
So I wonder whether I might just add, it's on focusing on the framework, and you will have appreciated Mr. Latham making the point that the council's position is that the plan as proposed now with the proposed changes, ECD3, and as anticipated at the point of adoption is sound. So that's the firm position of the council. Your question is, well, how can we so conclude, having regard to paragraph 35, on the basis that at present there isn't an identified supply to meet the need in full? That does not prevent a conclusion that the plan is sound. The starting point is by reference to 35A and positive preparation. And you'll have noticed the reference to the provision of a strategy which seeks to meet the needs. A strategy. That's not a single policy or a single figure, it's an overall strategy which seeks to meet the need. It doesn't say, in actual fact, it has to identify land to meet the need in full. It's a strategy which will enable, at the point of adoption, the needs to be met. Here, in this plan, the council's position is that the plan, as proposed to be adopted with the changes, will meet the needs in full. So 35A is already passed on that basis, which of course you will want to consider having regard to all the evidence. Moreover, the plan, the strategy, as proposed to be adopted next year, will significantly boost the provision of housing, consistent with another important part of the framework, exceeding by twice what's gone before. And that's another reason why, when one looks at the whole, the strategy, which has to be an appropriate strategy, will seek to meet the need in full, and in our case, we'll actually do that at the point of adoption for the reasons given in our responses to your initial questions. The fact that the plan has not identified a supply of sufficient allocations which numerically reaches that need figure does not mean that the strategy is unsound. Not least because the framework doesn't say that, the framework says the opposite. So does the PPG. It expressly contemplates the situation that we're in now and makes it clear that that can't lead necessarily to a conclusion that the strategy is unsound. So far as an early review is concerned, it follows from what I've said and what Mr. Latham has said that the council's position is an early review is not necessary. On the other hand, we would be content if you reached the conclusion that it was necessary to make the plan sound, contrary to our position, then we would
happily consider it positively. But let me add, to be entirely clear, that even if it could be argued that the plan at the time of adoption would not meet OAN in full, contrary to our case, that would still not prevent a conclusion that the plan is sound by reference to the framework when read as a whole. That's because, in part, the reasons I've already referred to, the requirement is, in policy, to seek to meet the needs in full. It doesn't say that actually meet the needs in full. And it's the strategy rather than the policy or particular figure that's I'm highlighting. Paragraph 60, the overall aim should be to meet as much of the area's identified housing need as possible. There might be good reasons for concluding, in the circumstance, the hypothetical circumstance that I'm explaining, that the strategy and the plan is sound, irrespective of a shortfall, not a novel position at local plans. That might be because the shortfall is small, not significant. In our view, the shortfall by reference to identified land is not large, it's modest. It might be because there's a future change in circumstances that can be looked at and relied upon to improve the position so that the plan can be seen as sound. And there might be other aspects of soundness that might weigh in the overall balance when looking at the framework as a whole, which leads to the conclusion that notwithstanding an identified shortfall that is a concern in the housing land supply, overall it's sound. Again, not a novel conclusion so far as local plans are concerned. And of course, paragraph 11b contemplates just such good reasons. Paragraph 11b of the framework, constraints which in this borough are very significant. So even on that hypothesis, it doesn't necessarily lead to the conclusion that the plan is not sound. So I hope that's a careful and helpful exposition of our position in relation to consistency with the framework.
I think that's why, to be fair, I think that's why I said as well, is it's a very difficult question to answer on day one, because the council's strategy, is some significant growth through Elgarn communities. That's a fundamental part of the council's strategy, and that's something that we need to come on to test. And we don't know we don't know the answers to those questions. We've got the strategic day on the week commencing the 20th of October to sort of unpick those issues around this is how the council's strategy is seeking to meet its housing needs through X, Y, and Z. Other large sites that we'll come on to discuss really is where this issue lies, rather than trying to say, well, is it 300? Is it 500? Is it 800? We don't really know at this stage. Mr. Bainbridge, and we'll also work around this way, so I know that gentleman here wants to make a point.
So I think we're all agreed that policy H1 is a strategic policy for the purposes of the framework. I believe I understood council for the council to say that the council's position is that the plan as submitted is sound, not unsound. In respect of policy H1, it's been established through examination documents between yourself, sir, and the council, that the council does consider the plans unsound in respect of H1. So I just think it's an important clarification to be provided. I'm not disagreeing with council, of course, but just looking to clarify that particular point that the council has accepted in writing, so there's correspondence ED3 and ED5, that the plan as submitted is unsound and its proposed modifications. And the reason I raise that beyond just a point of clarity following on council's comments is that we have concerns regarding strategic policy MOM1, which says no doubt you do not wish to necessarily discuss this afternoon, but just to flag for a future discussion, if I may, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. You heard comments from myself and others earlier on in response to an earlier question about why the requirement might be increased above 1016. Just before I go on to other points, what that does is reinforce, in our view, that this is a plan which should set an adequate framework to ensure those minimum requirements are met. But I've got a series of comments, really, that work on the basis of your figures in question 5 and look behind the curtain. So at the outset, this is a plan, I think, established through the modifications that does not meet the requirements 24 to 41. It's a starker situation, obviously, when it comes to affordable housing. The suggestion that needs would be met was a fundamental component of the plan's preparation. That is what the Regulation 19 consultation was premised on. Now the Council brings to your attention the language and the framework about seeking to meet identified needs. As far as I can tell, that's a point that it seeks to apply in retrospect, having realised it's not the case. We've set out in our statement for this section that although the Council maintains the plan will result in a 5-year supply at adoption, that is contingent on the Liverpool approach, addressing shortfalls over plan period. Taking on a point made by RPS, essentially all that does is delay unmet needs until later. But it's for the authority to tell you, as set out in PPG, why that approach is justified. As far as I can see, it's not done so. And so the starting position should be the Sedgefield approach. The Council refers to you to the suggestion that if it had to apply a 20% buffer, it could still have a 5-year supply. It's not a case of if, but it's a case of when. You look in the framework, the references in our statement, it will be applying a 20% buffer next summer. Our position is that, and you've got the figures in our statement, so I won't set them out, but it will not deliver a 5-year supply with Sedgefield and a 20% buffer to the requirement in the early part of the plan period, certainly. When you look at the Council statement, just picking up some of what you heard just now, it appears to suggest that the solution is well, we've got some other sites that have been granted this year. Well, at least one case, and that's site reference HM09, that's already in the Council supply. So just a point to be wary of double counting. But that set of comments there, it is just a snapshot. What it doesn't do is give you any balance between requirement and supply or undertake any analysis of those sites' deliverability. And I know you almost certainly don't want to hear about this now, but a point on windfalls, and I think this is important because when we're talking about how this plan is meeting the requirement or not meeting the requirement, something like 20% of the homes expected are from windfall sources. That represents about 240 dwellings per annum, effective in the trajectory from 28-29, that's in document ED3. You have appended to our Matter 2 statements, not in the examination library, the Council's housing land supply assessment statement. That has a windfall rate of 35 dwellings per annum. So you have a significant difference between what the Council is telling you comes from windfalls in one context rather than the other. And if that approach were adopted, then the accrued shortfall or the actual shortfall to 2041 is even greater. There is no evidence to claim that the shortfall to the end of the plan period will be addressed. And in response to the question that you asked, sir, at the opening of this question, the answer is no, this is not a strategy which meets needs. It's a strategy to miss those needs. The shortfall cannot be described in my submission as not large. If it is 872, as per your question, it's not far off a year of the requirement. And you're not being told, as far as I'm aware, that the constraints present in the authority are so significant that those needs couldn't be met.
Yeah, thank you, Saz. Just in context of remaining consistent, there was a point made on this side of the table about soundness matter and the apparent change in position of the council. It's important to also draw your attention to ED6 and paragraph 1.3, where the council makes reference to a commitment to an early review, an early review of the plan. And I would suggest that it's implicit in that willingness to commit to that it expects to need to commit. So again, it's an apparent change in position.
It may not surprise the representatives around the table here this afternoon that we are opposed to a level of which is in the plan. But I think it's possibly been touched on already by us how the Hemel Gardens community, as you've referred to, and then in November, December, the individual site assessment is going to take place. What I don't understand is if out comes out of those sessions, you decide that a number of these sites are not sound and for whatever reason should not be included in the plan. Where does this leave the council? Do we then go back to an assessment of need and consider which in our view we are on on the record that we've objected to the level of need, but also the method in which it's calculated. We think, for a start, that demand, which is undoubtedly very high in certain places, some of that conflicted position, they're not need, they are demand. But just interested in where do we stand as a borough? If at the end of the sessions, say coming December, it has been decided that, say, several thousand potential homes are not sound. I know that around the table there will be plenty of people here who offer additional solutions to that. But I mean, just to understand, where do we stand?
So this is why I've said it's very difficult to answer this question on day one. So day one, really, we're looking at the requirement figure. So that's the 17,272 figure. If we go through this process and the council have said, well, we've got about 16,400 and the gap is continuing to narrow, if we get to a situation in November, December, or even in the new year where Mr. Bristol and I say, well, that site's not sound, that site's not sound, and that site's sound, but it's not going to deliver anywhere near the rate you're going to think it's delivered at, and you're X thousand homes short, then we're going to have to be in a position where we write to the council and say, what are you going to do about this? It wouldn't be for us, that's what I said this morning, it wouldn't be for us to say, oh, that's a great site, allocate that one. That's a great site, allocate that one. We in that situation would write to the council and say, there's an issue here, how are you going to rectify that? And that would be a matter for the council. And you've probably heard us talk about, well, do they commit to doing an immediate review? So is the shortfall at the back end of the plan period and the council say, well, we can adopt this plan now and get these sites under construction and then find some more later? Do they go back out to a call for sites to try and find more sites? People around the table are be happy to help. So that would be a matter for the council. And that's why I'm saying it's very difficult for Mr. Bristol and I to sit here today and say, oh, you should go find more sites, or you should do an early review, or you should do this, because we don't actually know what that gap is. We've not actually tested whether these sites in this document are sound. And until we've done that, we can't really direct the council on what they should do about it.
And I understand that, but it's just interested that you get to that point and there is a bigger shortfall. You go back to the council and they have to go do all those things, further consultation, and the same conversation is taking place in this room as it's been taking place this afternoon and will over the next several days.
Exactly, and that would be why it would be for the council to consider. I mean, we're talking hypothetically, but that's why it would be for the council to consider at that stage their various options. Do they go to look at sites that they've already tested? Do they go back out and start again? Do they withdraw the plan and start again? I don't know. I'm talking hypothetically, but that's why at this stage we can't possibly say. I can tell the council that yes, I agree with them that it should start in 2024 and run to 2021, and that the consequence of that is it's 17,000, whatever it is. Whether or not they're short on their numbers, we can't, you know, it might be to sort of be in the interest of fairness in my hypothetical world, is that we get to a situation where in 6 months' time, Mr. Bristol and I have been to all these sites and we agree with the council. We may well agree with what Mr. Laden said, that actually all these sites are entirely deliverable in the way in which they set out, and that there isn't a shortfall at all. There's no gap, everything's fine. So there's all these different hypothetical situations. I know it's really difficult, but until we actually get into the sort of nitty-gritty of these sites and start to look at them, we simply don't know the answers. That makes sense? Yeah. Mr. Chick on the end.
Thank you. Jonathan Chick, Nexus Planning, representing Crest Nixon. I don't want to repeat the comments made by the participants. I just wanted to flag really a plan as submitted didn't have a requirement and that its minimum housing need. It was 92 dwellings above the local housing need figure, which obviously was above it and met that test, but there was limited flexibility, noting the heavy reliance on larger sites. But the plan now, obviously it's changed a lot, and 870 dwelling shortfall is completely different to what the plan that was submitted. We have concerns in that respect. In terms of meeting that test, being positively prepared. I also want to clarify there are some areas in our statement, I think paragraph, just our position remains that that shortfall, we don't think it meets the test in terms of being positively prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. So the council have said that they are seeking to meet needs in full, but alongside this, they've also said that the shortfall will be met by completions and commitments, which the council expects will be addressed through windfall. Some of these sites may be outline sites, which raises the question around timescales and deliverability of those sites. This in itself, I don't think represents a positive plan-led approach, the dependence on windfall to meet that shortfall. And I think the council could have done more to allocate particularly smaller sites which could deliver sooner in the plan period to meet that, address that shortfall and not to have to rely on windfall, which may or may not come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's sort of getting to a bit of a mop-up on this one now, so I'll try and keep it fairly brief. But I think we've just got to remind ourselves, and it's going back to the question 5 and what we've been asked to consider, is this plan positively preferred in relation to the contribution for housing? We hear from the council that what is being proposed can give confidence and certainty, and that the figure itself, the shortfall, whatever it may be, is only modest. That's quite an interesting record of it. To put that into context, though, the figure 870 dwellings, that's tantamount to something you'd expect of a new settlement or a number of other modest-sized developments if you were to go that way or you were that way inclined. It's a significant figure that we're faced with. And what I would present at this stage is that that represents the council's best case scenario. This is the best foot forward, and yet we're still starting from a shortfall of 870. That, I say, does not provide any certainty or confidence that the plan is being prepared positively. The council have offered in their statement in table 1 a number of sites which they say is shortening the gap, taking it down to some 350 or so. As sort of pointed out by others, some of those are already committed elsewhere in the plan, hence double counting. And it's worth noting that of that list of sites, around 73% of those are outline in nature. So whilst I'm not disputing the deliverability overall, it certainly casts doubts whether the council could include them within the next 5 years' supply. That is a matter for another day. The other point to note about certainty is that, as alluded to by the gentleman from Turley, around 20% of the proposed contribution from the total supply is windfall development. So we have a shortfall of 870. 20% of the proposed supply, that's about 4,000 units, is proposed on windfall sites. And I think, again, that raises real questions over the credibility of the deliverability of that supply. You were taken to the council's latest housing land supply statement, which indicated a windfall allowance of 175 dwellings, somewhat different from the 240 in ED3. Just to go into that a little bit further, and I don't want to get into the nuances of supply here, but to insist the examination, the origins of that figure may well have come from the Tring appeal decision from 2023. It's appended to my appeal. No, I don't want to, it's nearing 4:30 in the afternoon. I don't want to test anyone's patience, but
It's not that it's not relevant. It's just not relevant to this debate at all.
no, I completely agree, sir, that the minutiae of the supply isn't important, but even on a very high level reading, I'm already seeing kind of chinks in that best case scenario that I was referring to. And so I was only trying to articulate that point. As we've heard already, there are limited opportunities for growth outside of settlement boundaries, whilst given the sort of the composition of the authority, we have AONB, you have Greenbelt. What I would leave you there with, sir, is the overarching question about, is it appropriate for the council to delegate or leave so much unmet need outside the plan-led process? Or, given the nature of the authority, is it not best met through a plan-led system where you can create the certainty that the council have set out that they expect? Thank you.
This one's coming on. Can you hear me? Only this one's red. Is that okay? Sorry, Helen Reid from LSH representing Plato Estates. A lot of the points that I was going to make have just been raised by others, so I won't go into them again. I just wanted to point towards and a lot of them I think we're going to get into the site selection process, so I'll leave them for that. Our client has a site that's not included, as probably many others here do, and I just wanted to highlight the flow chart in the planning practice guidance that shows the mechanism that they're supposed to go through to get to a housing figure, and it shows the steps that you go through in terms of sites, broad location assessments, windfall assessments, assessment review. You get to stage 4, and it clearly asks, is there enough sites and broad locations in the plan? If the answer is no, the flowchart clearly shows you have to go back to stage 2 and consider those sites again. It's quite typical that does happen in the plan process if some sites aren't deliverable, but to come in at this stage with 870 dwelling shortfall when they haven't gone back and considered other sites, in our view, is not positively prepared and not sound. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'm hearing some very loud messages about what we don't want to discuss today, so I'm just going to take that on board, particularly on the matter of windfall. I'm sure we will pick that up in due course. Probably just maybe some factual points, if I can. I note reference, I think, by Mr. Murray Cox taken with regards to factually within our statement. We made reference to HM09 within our table of additional supply. That is an allocation that now has permission. But the supply that we've included in that is just 5 homes. It's 5 more than what the allocation provided. Just for that we're not double counting. A lot of discussion on sites, and we've talked a little bit about there's more, to be discussed. And I don't want to repeat all of that, but I equally just want to note that there's a number of sites within the plan, in particular their Regulation 19 representations.
have indicated that they feel their sites could consider more as well. So sites within the plan, some site promoters feel their sites could deliver more. I just wanted to add that point into the mix. While there's other sites looking to be in the plan, they agree there's a number of sites saying they do contribute more towards supply. They're the key points I just wanted to make right now. I don't think there's anything more beyond the evidence we've already presented and everything we've discussed so far as part of this session. Thank you.
Just in terms of sort of agreed position then on what the requirement is, what the plan period is, and what policy H1 needs to say, when you come to look at policy H1, I think there has been a little bit of confusion in the way in which part 1 is set out, where it's talking about what it's going to deliver. I would just be having a look and tweaking H1, just be abundantly clear. This is the house, this is the minimum housing requirement over the plan period, because then the rest of it does actually stray into supply and trajectories and things like that. So just really clear what your requirement is. And then, like I said, table 2 will naturally be updated. That's your trajectory. And then the plan will set out, obviously, how it's going to meet those needs. But yeah, just really clear up front as to what the housing requirement is. And then obviously, yeah, have a bit of a sense check. I don't know if that plan period issue then crops up in other areas of the plan. It may be buried in some supporting text somewhere. But again, I'll leave that with you to just have a bit of a sense check of that. Tom, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, and this isn't a particularly useful observation, but obviously you've got the minimum number of homes in policy SS1 as well, which I'm sure you knew, but that's what we're going to come on to tomorrow, and I'm going to be in the lead on, so that's why I'm just particularly looking at that, but that will need modification as well. Yeah, thank you. But no further questions from me. Thanks.
Was there anything else on the requirement then? So let's reach a bit of common ground as to what the requirement should say. I know there's discussions to come around supply, and obviously wind falls an important component of that, and we will talk about that. But just in terms of the requirement, yeah.
Yeah, as Hugh touched on, have we? There is no questioning the government enforced algorithm for what need is for the area, because the need is actually a proxy for demand, and we get bumped up for an affordability ratio that has been generated because the houses that have been built in certain parts of the area have purely been to take the pressure, well, not take the pressure off, but inward migration from other even more affluent areas. So on the affordability ratio that the government uses, it's using a lower local salary compared to the salaries that are filling the houses. And this is what you're going to hear from developers. Obviously, you've heard it loads of times, that things have got to change and we'll generate all these affordable homes. But like in the cases with Berkhamsted, the homes come out used to come out at the affordable was 80%, but that was 80% on a 2-bedroom of 475. So it was only affordable to salaries of 100,000. So it wasn't actually. It's never attacked what it's supposed to do. It's never solved the problem. And that's where we come from. We've heard a lot about need, and it seems to be that it's just accepted. And if it's accepted, and we can't challenge that, then we've got to accept that, and then just go onto the sides. But when you see our problem, our need is generated to be a high need from outside economic pressures from other areas that have better economic situation in terms of salaries. And that's been happening for years, and has built up this ratio that boosts it.
Yeah, and valid points. I think where I'd come from it is that we, and this is a point that the council's made in their various documents, sort of going right back to sort of earlier stages of plan making, is is what national planning policies. This plan has to be consistent with national planning policy. That's one of the tests that we put on the council, and that's why we're here and sort of interrogating the evidence and what have you. And obviously, one of those tests is whether or not the plan seeks to meet housing needs, and then that cross refers to planning practice guidance, which talks about the local housing need assessment. So that's where the council's coming from in terms of, could they have gone and done another way of calculating housing needs? Well, to be consistent with national planning policy, that directs them to go and do it in accordance with the local housing need assessment. So that's sort of to be fair to the council, where their position is with it really, and ours as well. So and there are nuances to it, and there's a question in there about, could you go above your minimum local housing needs? There are councils, and national planning policy does allow for still identifying the need, but then saying, well, we can't meet that need for some reason, be it flooding, other constraints, etc., etc. So, but in terms of the actual need assessment and where that stands, that's where the council is sort of bound by local housing needs assessment and sort of prescribed planning policy on that. So it's very, important and relevant points, but for the council, that they would say, well, their sort of hands are tied almost, and it's set out in national planning policy how we calculate these needs. That feeds into the numbers that we talk about really here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Is that a fair summary? Do you want to add anything further to that?
I think it's perfectly reasonable. Obviously, that recognise that it's one of the issues that local residents raised, further right now the stage, and I think it's worth maybe we can have this discussion on it through the hearings, but I've nothing further to add right now. Thank you.
Ms. Reid, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise a couple more points about the need for older people's housing that I didn't get to raise earlier. That's the right time. So I think you've picked up most of the points that we made in our representation and hearing statement, and we talked about whether there should be a quantitative figure in the plan for older people's need, which, and I understand the issues around that. We just feel that there is absolutely nothing in the plan at the moment that provides for this type of development to come forward. Our client would like to develop this type of housing, and as currently drafted, there isn't really a policy mechanism that allows for this beyond the large allocated sites. So we suggested sort of 3 modifications for the need for older people's housing, and the first, which we've already discussed, was including a target and quantified figure, whether that's possible or not. But secondly, and perhaps as an alternative, it could include a policy which supports the delivery of older persons housing across the borough, including on windfall sites. And thirdly, we'd just like to point out that the only references to older people's housing at the moment are on the large strategic sites. And as we've pointed out in our reps and in the viability workshop, this can present viability issues where developers are competing with volume house builders for this land, and older people's housing tends to suffer in viability rates. And also delivery timescales, they can take a long time. So we would support a policy or a review of the sites to include specific allocations for older persons housing on smaller sites that are available now. Thank you.
Yeah, we've discussed that. I think the purpose of, I think I said, the purpose of H1, we're looking at housing requirements and agreed modification. I think H2, we will need to give some further thought to, and I think I said whether it comes in paragraphs 3.8, 3.9, whether it gives a figure, whether it gives a range. That's something that the task council were going away and just having to think about before probably a sort of development management stage 3 type discussion about whether those policies are effective. And we'll come on tomorrow to talk about sort of spatial strategy and wider policies around almost your point about the windfall development for, a specialist care provider. What do we do? Where do we go? Where's our policy around that? Is it supported in principle? Presumably yes, within settlement boundaries it would be. Sort of put that one out there. But again, I think it's more development management issues really instead of a H1 housing requirement. Any final matters from the council?
Nothing further.
No.
Thank you.
So we're back tomorrow for those who are attending tomorrow, back in this room at 9:30. Obviously, if I could just again ask the council to maybe have a look at the microphone situation. Maybe Louise, if people have been struggling at home, obviously they've got the ability, haven't they, to come and use the sort of the room next door. Is that right? But they could do tomorrow. Is that right? Yeah. So if people wanted to, maybe I don't know, maybe we could get something added to the website so people at home have been really struggling and they wanted to observe, there is the opportunity for them to do so in the council building next door. I think that's right. So maybe we just put a note on, so if people are really struggling at home, they can still, and obviously there's some seats within the room as well. Tomorrow's a bit busier day, but equally there's still probably going to be some seats available for people to be in the room next door. So if I could sort of liaise and ask the council to liaise with Louise about just maybe adding a note to the examination website so people know, but also having a look at the microphones. I didn't know whether it was the batteries at some stage, because I felt like mine and Mr. Layden probably been doing the most talking and ours were the worst, but then randomly the last 10 minutes have got better. So I don't know. Just thinking of the last examination, we did have a similar issue, and then they changed all the batteries at lunchtime. So obviously for the eagle-eyed local plan enthusiasts, Mr. Bristow and I were at St Albans in May, and I think they changed all the batteries at lunchtime. I don't know whether that's, I'm not a tech person, Tom clearly is, but I don't know whether you want to just, explore that. I don't know. But no, if there's no matters arising, obviously thank you all for your time today. And for those attending, back tomorrow at 9:30. So we'll adjourn for the day. Thank you.